Abraham Speer. He decided as the cemetery started filling up, he might as well go in the cemetery business. If he was in the undertaking business, he might as well go into the cemetery business. He bought the land on the other side of the cemetery. That was the Stillbergen Cemetery over there. Supposedly, they said there was a state law that prevented establishing any more cemeteries in the city at that time. I know I talked to Mark. You don't know any truth to that, right? There was a state law prohibiting the creation of cemeteries?
No, probably a local
it's more likely it was a municipal law. The whole idea was to get the cemeteries out of town.
City thing. I read it somewhere.
Yeah, they had to get it out. At the same time, Hoboken Cemetery actually moved up to North Bergen at that time. So he bought the property from, again, if you look at the map, you'll see there's a Matties DeMott. The DeMott family were early settlers here. The map shows that they were original patent holder. They actually got the first land grant here in 1704. But there's an indication that they owned the property, not owned the property, but they occupied the property before that. What happened is when Bergen was settled, this was one of the boundaries where one of the barricades, the blockades of the cemetery were. The land in there was individually owned, but everything outside was called common land that they used to grow to graze their cattle and everything else. But over time, certain people settled in certain areas, so it seems like the DeMotts were here very long. When he bought the property in 1850, he bought it from Michael DeMott, a descendant of that one you see on there, and it was a much bigger portion then. It actually went all the way down to there, but it was existing graves on the property was specifically excluded. Now there's a DeMott family stone over here in a vault, and that's probably was the DeMott family burial ground on their farm over here. So Speer bought the property, supposedly took the fence down between the two cemeteries, and he was in the cemetery business. And him and his wife, now again, if you look through the paperwork I gave you, you're going to see a deed for the Varick. I think it was John Varick bought a plot in here. By the way, one of his descendants is one of our members. She lives in Florida. She's been fighting for about 30 years to try to fix this place. The tombstone, the grave is a little bit over there. I think he paid $28 for it over there. But that's what they did. They sold these individual graves to families who ever wanted to buy them. It is a deed to the land. You know, a grave, it's just like a plot of land. It's a deed, you own the land. And if you read through the deed, you'll see that the ownership of the land passes through to their descendants forever. So it was never incorporated. Records in 1944, a big series of articles came out in the Jersey Journal about what was already a mess here. Speer died in 1892. It seemed that afterwards that a number of local undertakers used it, again, may have used it as a potter's cemetery to bury people here. Probably there were instances where they did open graves of people who already could prove that they owned property, like the Varicks were able to do it. Some of them were buried here after that. But again, by 1944, there were burials here up till 1944. The article mentions that there was a recent burial in here, but when they went to the City Board of Health, they said we've never issued a burial permit. So I do believe what happened is right after that, because if you remember I told you over there in 1945 is when they stopped burials across the street, and I'm certain they also said no more burials in here. So there was never, also I think Richard would say that what would happen is when they started these cemeteries, they would have plot holders associations who would administer the cemetery, be responsible for taking care of it. But again, the land stayed in that family's name. So the problem is who owns all this land? In the early 1970s, the Jersey City Parking Authority came in and wanted to turn this into a parking garage. There was an uprising of local citizens who fought it. They got a lot of good coverage. They got media attention. The Star Ledger had a front page story of one of the tombstones saying, you know, lost. They got coverage on television stations. The local group got together. They fought it. They went and actually was voted down at that point. A couple of years later, I think under the Shunlin administration, they talked about turning it into a park. They ran into the problem with that you really can't make many changes in the cemetery without getting the consent of the descendants. There is no existing record that I know of who's buried in here. The reports in the 1970s say that a Mrs. Garrison had a map about it, but Mrs. Garrison right thereafter moved to Montclair and shortly thereafter died, and their family said, we don't know where the map is. So there's really no record of any of the burials. Now you see that deed that's in there, that was in the possession of her. The cemetery deeds were not filed in the county like most other deeds because nobody was really going to come in and bury somebody in your cemetery. So most of that, there's no public record to find out who owns it. Again, the problem comes up with who owns this cemetery, and it's a good question. We don't. I'm part of something called the Friends of Speer Cemetery. Last year we did get a $25,000 grant from the Hudson County Open Space Trust Fund to start doing sometime. At the same time, the city of Jersey City gave us a matching grant, and they put that fence up. Before last August, that was a chain link fence that was probably 50 years old and falling down. So that's we had a photograph, and that's pretty much historically appropriate for over there. So we stand now, what we do, one of the things we want to do, which I wanted to talk to Mark about, is to find out where the graves are here. We don't know where they are. There's so many open spaces. So one of the things we want to do is come in with this radar, ground penetrating radar, and be able to map where the graves are. This is where I stood with the landscape and said, what would it cost us to maintain this on an annual basis? And she quoted me $32,000. I don't know where I can get $32,000 a year to do this. So chances are we're going to have to, use volunteers, which again next week we're going to try to do. The one good news is don't feel too bad about all this grass because the county, Hudson County, did step forward. Bill LaRose, the head of Cultural Affairs and Tourism, was successful in getting the Jersey City Incinerator Authority to cut the grass here. The reason it hasn't been cut is because of this weather we've had. But they do plan to come in and cut through here, and they've done a great job. They come regularly and they've been doing it, so it's a lot better off than it was. But one of the issues when we do this radar thing is we got to get the debris out. While they're cutting it, they're not raking it. So we're going to try. Hopefully, if we're able to get them to cut it this year, we will then. This month, we'll be able to rake as much as that. We're going to have a dumpster out here, and we're going to try to get as much of this out. It's 4 acres, so it's a lot of ground. A lot of it is empty, and you're all invited to help that day if you'd like. You can stay for now, you can drop by, we don't mind. But if you want to help, it'd be helpful. Because this is the kinds of problem we're facing, how to fix kind of things.
Do they use lawnmowers or
They come in with lawnmowers, they do it. Yep, they've done a pretty good job.
They hit the stones?
That could be a problem. I've heard that they've broken a couple of lawnmowers. Yeah. This is always the worst time, the first cutting, that always gets so big. But this is the problem with cemeteries. It keeps growing. I was with a banker from Sovereign Bank because we were trying to talk about getting money from them to do this. And he said, oh, those cemeteries have been cleaned up a long time ago. I said, you don't realize it keeps growing. It doesn't stop. It's a never-ending thing. So that's what we need to do. Well, I'm not a farmer, so I don't know, but it's supposedly 4 acres, but it does go over. It does form an L shape.
You know the street, right? I know it goes out there. I used to walk
All right, just long as there's no poison ivy. I don't care about the pretty.
Poison ivy, where is it?
It will come to you. Just keep your hands up and don't touch your face.
I know, I get that too.
What?
Well, last time I had poison ivy, I couldn't move my fingers.
Oh, I had it on my eyes, and I was in 8th grade, so I
I was out of work for 2 weeks.
was